Juan Mendez Scott's Hologram. Chapter 8. All the Millions. Roxie Rosario's funeral was beautiful. Thousands of fans showed up in Fort Washington to mourn Roxie's death at the Ebenezer AME Church that drizzling Saturday morning. Mourning fans lined the police-blocked streets outside the church. As Roxie's coffin was being carried down Allentown Road by a horse-drawn carriage. The carriage was white, with glass windows and pink roses resting on its roof. Fans stared at Roxie's white coffin, shocked and crying. They couldn't believe it was her. Once the horses pulled the carriage into the massive parking lot of the church, fans ran behind it, crying out Roxie's name. The Rosario family, along with Roxie's husband and myself, lead the large crowd of mourners walking behind the carriage. Some of them carried and waved super-large posters of Roxie as the pallbearers carried her coffin into the church on their shoulders. Famous people blessed us with their presence, including director Nick Rodham, who finished editing Roxie's last music video a day before her death. There were famous rappers, R&B stars, music producers, future Hall of Fame NFL and NBA players in attendance, crowding the church along with over 3,000 mourners. After the sad, tear-drenched funeral, the pallbearers slid Roxie's casket into a waiting hearse for her private burial. Prince George's County Police had Fort Washington Road blocked off for the funeral procession. Reese funeral professionals pulled up to the front doors of the mansion in 2 Rolls-Royce limos. Doug, Mr. and Mrs. Rosario, Estella, and Ricardo got out of one limo and Todd and his mother got out of the other. The hearse pulled up and stopped behind them. The pallbearers carried Roxie's casket to her tomb on their shoulders. I wondered if they would need to ice their shoulders down later from walking around all day with Roxie's casket on their shoulders. By anyway, the Rosarios and I and my mother stepped in slow motion behind them. Mrs. Rosario looking like a drunk, weeping woman with Mr. Rosario and Ricardo on each side of her to hold her up. Doug the widower had to help Mr. Rosario and Ricardo out now and then with Mrs. Rosario whenever her knees buckled, like she was about to faint. Later on, after they lay Roxie to rest, while the Rosario family stood by her massive crypt, I stood in my study, looking around at photos of Roxie and looking at highlights of her funeral on TV, all the while quietly basking in my victory. I couldn't wait till everyone left to leave Estella and me to celebrate. Yeah, I loved the mansion and all. And how the mansion was going to make myself and the Rosarios so much money as a museum. But I still had plans on building Estella and I a mansion once the smoke cleared from Roxie's shocking death. So, I left my study to go out and check on the Rosarios. And when I got outside, Mrs. Rosario was kneeling down at Roxie's crypt, crying, her head buried in the palms of her hands. Estella, Mr. Rosario, and Ricardo stood by, watching, their hearts aching with sadness. Mr. Rosario, I could tell, was ready to leave to grieve in private. "Come on, honey," he said to his wife. "It's time to go home. You need your rest." Mrs. Rosario shook her head, ready to spend the night inside the crypt, beside the coffin. "I don't want to leave my baby." I moved closer, wanting to help and hurry them off. "Need some help?" Ricardo, the little bastard, shot me a sharp look. "We got it." I understood he was in an awful mood after losing his sister, but I still didn't appreciate his dry, dismissive tone. If it wasn't such a sad occasion, I probably would have backhanded him. "I'm not ready to leave yet," Mrs. Rosario said. I could barely hear her through the weeping. "I know you don't," Mr. Rosario said, "but you need some rest. It's been a long day. Personally, I'll be glad when it ends." Mr. Rosario and Doug helped Mrs. Rosario to her feet. Mr. Rosario peeped back into Estella's face and said, "You going home, Estella? Or are you staying the night with us?" Estella wiped away tears and said, "I'm going to stay here and clean up. I'm going home tonight. I need some time to myself for a minute. I'll be over tomorrow." Mrs. Rosario's tears came to a halt, and she looked at her only living daughter with hurt feelings. "Estella, we need to mourn together. As a family. We all need each other right now. I know, Estella said. I'll be over tomorrow. Love y'all, be careful going home. Love you. See you tomorrow, Mr. Rosario said. Take care, Estella, Doug said, giving me a dirty look. Talk to you later. Yeah, he may have been the grieving widower. But I was the one going home with the main prize, the life insurance. Mrs. Rosario started crying again. Because something is not right. Roxie was always on top of her asthma attacks. Something is not right. Come on, honey, let's go, Mr. Rosario said. Mrs. Rosario eyeballed me hard as they carried her away. He probably had something to do with it. I knew she was talking about me, and I didn't give a damn. Prove it. I know he did. I stood there with my arms crossed, maintaining my cool. Estella stared over at me, scared her mother was close to figuring it out that I committed the perfect murder murdering her daughter. Thank you for all your help with the funeral, Todd, Mr. Rosario said. No problem, sir, I said. Anything you need. I'm here. Mean that. I'm going to walk them to the car, Estella said to me. Be back. When I stepped into the house, I almost ran straight to the kitchen, so excited they were finally gone. I fixed 2 drinks of vodka and cranberry. I gulped my drink down and poured another, pushing Estella's drink to the side until she got back into the house. I leaned back against the counter as I sipped on my drink. Now I could move on with my life as a rich man with my plans, like Prince and Michael Jackson and Elvis, for Roxie to rake in millions for me as a dead celebrity. Moments later, Estella moped in and dragged herself into the family room, sitting down on the couch, staring off into the burning fireplace in a sad daze. To hell with being sad. I gulped my drink down and poured another, ready to celebrate. I looked over at Estella, shrugged, and said, well. Estella broke out of her daze and peeped back at me, looking like all the blood drained out of her. I could tell Estella was now suddenly feeling guilty and suicidal, and I needed to reel her back in. Estella said, well, what? I walked over to her with the 2 drinks. I said, well, we're on our way, right? We can sit back now, wait for the insurance money to come in. Make sure your parents are good, break them off a little something. Rake in millions from Roxie's vault. Rake in millions from her hologram concerts. I handed Estella her drink because she needed one. She nodded, dropping her head, as if she were praying the sadness and quilt would slide down off her face and into her drink. We started an affair behind her sister's back. The hate and jealousy she had for her little sister matched the hate and jealousy I had for my ex-business partner Doug, Roxie's husband. Thus, our mission to destroy the both of them was born. I conned my way into Roxie's heart and turned her against Doug, ending their marriage. Although Roxie would not divorce him. And the plot to murder Roxie for all her money started there. The poison of guilt and regret seeped into Estella's bloodstream, and that concerned me. Staring down at her, I said, what's wrong? If we're so rich and happy all of a sudden, then why do I feel so bad right now? I put my drink on the coffee table, sat down beside her, and held her in my arms, consoling her. I think seeing your parents cry like that has upset you. Estella continued staring down at her drink. I've never seen them cry like that before. Once the millions hit your bank account, you'll feel much better. Trust me. Estella thought about it and tears invaded her eyes. Just thinking. Me and my sister never got along, growing up. I hated her guts. But we seemed to get along lately. That's because we were trying to set her up, remember? Keep your enemies close. This is the reason you keep your enemies close. Estella shook her head and downed her drink, frowning as if she just gulped down a glass of acid. Guilt was eating her from the inside out. Don't feel too bad, Stella. I was the one who murdered her, not you. Yeah. But I helped plan it. That's just as bad. I took a swig from my drink. I have an idea that would make you feel better. What? I got Estella drunk enough to carry her upstairs to make hard, passionate love to her, putting her to sleep, sending her to sweet dreams with a smile on her face. However, she didn't stay asleep long, waking up to catch me on the phone, reacting to the good news. She just laid there in a fetal position, unable to abandon the sad, guilty days from her face. A hangover abducted her, her hair a violent mess, hence the hard love-making. I glanced over at her as I talked on the phone, proud of my bed skills. Yes, sure thing, Steve, I said. I think we should use a lot of her Super Bowl halftime performance for this summer's tour. What do you think? Excellent. I think we should use that one too. Don't worry, I have plenty of ideas. Roxie is going to live on forever, making us all stupid rich. Estella peeped back at me with guilt, wondering who I was talking to. Great. I'll talk to you tomorrow. Good night, my friend. I turned my phone off and laid it on the bedside table next to the lamp. Estella turned and faced me, giving me a funny look. We're making all these plans for my sister. On the day of her funeral? We have to move forward, Stella. You know that. Time to make money while we sleep. Her body is not even cold yet. I chuckled. And won't be. As warm, snug, and cozy as that tomb out there is. Estella sat up, burying her face in her hands. I said, hey. With her head still buried in the palms of her hands, she said, what? Instead of sitting there feeling all guilty, you need to clear some room in your bank account. Because when the insurance money comes in and all the millions from endless Roxie Rosario concerts, you're going to need that room.